Hey guys, today I'd like to talk about the cranial nerves. There's a series of 12 nerves that emerge directly from the brain, and these nerves are really important. They do some very crucial things in our bodies, such as allow us to move our face, feel our face. They allow us to see and smell, in addition to controlling some important processes in the body like digestion. So these nerves that emerge from the brain are crucially important. I'm going to step through each one of these nerves. Here I have drawn kind of a ventral view of the brain. So this is an not a ventral, but an inferior view of the brain. Here you can see the underside of the brain. Here are the two frontal lobes, the two temporal lobes. This is the cerebellum and the posterior side of the brain. And then we have the brain stem, which consists of the medulla. This would be the spinal cord down here, turns into the medulla as it enters the skull, and then we have the pons. The midbrain is on top of the pons, you can't really see it. I'm also going to draw a kind of a lateral view of the brain stem so we can get a better idea of exactly where these nerves emerge from. So here we're going to have the thalamus. I'll draw that guy in pink. Okay, underneath the thalamus, that's where we're going to have this midbrain, which is located right there. Okay, midbrain kind of looks like that. The pons is going to be underneath that midbrain. I'll draw him there. And then finally, we have the medulla, which transitions into the spinal cord down below. So thalamus, midbrain, pons, medulla. Okay, so I've listed out the 12 cranial nerves. And I'm going to kind of draw them out where they are and talk to you guys about what they do. I'm actually going to start with the second cranial nerve, which is our optic nerve. This guy allows us to see. So when we are listing kind of the functions of each one of these nerves, I'm going to use a color code. Blue indicates that it's a sensory function. Red is going to indicate that it's a motor function. So for the optic nerve, this allows us to see, or it allows vision. I drew that in blue because it's sensory. Now the optic nerve is going to exist right about here. So we'll have our two eyes, we'll have an eye here, okay? The optic nerve is going to transmit information from the eye to the brain. But something unique happens when these optic nerves enter into the brain. They actually cross over into a structure called the optic chiasm. So if we were to draw this out, you have each optic nerve, which is right here and here. So the optic nerve is going to be located right there. Okay. Now the optic nerve from the left eye kind of crosses over, and some of these neurons are going to cross over to the right side of the brain, while some are going to proceed to the left side of the brain. But ultimately, the pathway is we have the optic nerve, the optic chiasm, then they emerge as the optic tracts. The optic tracts are going to go to the thalamus, and from the thalamus, they're going to converge with another set of neurons, which are going to send that information to the primary visual cortex. Okay, so that's the complete kind of pathway. From this view, you'll notice that the optic nerve is going to come in, is going to form the optic chiasm right about here. And then the nerves are going to split off like this. So you have the optic nerve that comes in. Here's the optic chiasm. The optic tracts emerge from the optic chiasm, and those optic tracts go right into the thalamus, where they are going to then connect with another set of neurons, go back to the primary visual cortex. Okay. So to label this guy is number 2. Now, the number 1, the first cranial nerve, is the olfactory. I drew him second because in this view, he's kind of lying underneath the optic nerve. This olfactory nerve is going to allow us to smell. And what happens is that you're going to have this olfactory nerve, which is positioned right about here. All these little dots, those represent neurons that are passing through the cribriform plate of the ethmoid. This is that little plate that from that kind of superior view of the skull, the top of the skull taken off. Well, these neurons, that gives those neurons access to the inside of our nasal cavity. So we have chemoreceptors in our nasal cavity and the epithelium of our nasal cavity. These afferent neurons are going to connect to those olfactory receptors. They're going to receive information about smell. These neurons pass through the cribriform plate, they converge in this olfactory nerve, which then sends signal to the primary olfactory cortex, which is on the medial side of this temporal lobe. That's another reason why during like a really nasty head injury, like a concussion, causes the brain to move within the side of the skull, and it can shear all of those tiny little neurons, which can destroy our sense of smell. So the olfactory nerve allows us to smell. I'm writing that in blue because it's purely sensory. Okay, now the third nerve, and I'm not going to draw it in this view because the olfactory nerve completely doesn't interact with the brainstem or the thalamus at all. The third nerve is called the oculomotor. This guy is going to be located right here. He's going to, looks like he comes out from kind of the anterior side of the pons. And this oculomotor nerve has both sensory and motor functions. The motor function of the oculomotor nerve is that it controls 4 of our 6 external eye muscles. So I'm just going to write 4 eye muscles, okay? We've got 6 eye muscles connected to each eye. This allows us to look around. 4 of these muscles are controlled by that oculomotor nerve. This guy is going to extend from right at the border between the pons and the midbrain. You can't see it from this view, but from this view you can. Here's the midbrain and the pons. That is nerve number 3, okay? And this guy extends out from the border between the pons and the midbrain. He projects through the superior orbital fissure, which is in the back of the orbit, and that gives him access to the inside of the orbit so he can control those eye muscles. He also has some autonomic functions. These are motor functions that we can't consciously control. Specifically, this allows us to control how wide our pupils are, so it controls our iris. It also allows us to focus on different objects, whether it's up close or far away. This is due to its projections or motor connections to the ciliary body within the eye, so it allows us to focus. And then finally, we have some more autonomic functions that hold our eye open. So this is going to stimulate the levator palpebrae muscle, which holds our eyelids open and keeps our eyes open. So I'm just going to say eyes open, or open eyes would be better. So it doesn't matter. Now there are a couple of sensory pathways. Remember proprioceptors? These are the receptors that are located in muscle that tell the brain information about the position of the muscles when they're stretched. Well, these 4 eye muscles are going to have proprioceptors in them, and that information is going to be sent also through the oculomotor nerve. So I'm going to say proprioception. Typically, whenever there's a muscle that's being stimulated, that same nerve is going to carry information about the proprioception. Okay. Number 4 is the trochlear nerve. He's going to be kind of over off to this side in this view. The trochlear nerve controls 1 of those 6 eye muscles. So, trochlear nerve is going to be right there. From this view, the trochlear nerve actually emerges from the posterior side of the midbrain, right about there. It looks like he emerges from the pons from this view, but he doesn't. He emerges from that midbrain, and that is nerve number 4. Okay? Now, what the trochlear nerve does is this guy controls 1 of the eye muscles, specifically the superior oblique. So, we're going to say 1 eye muscle, which is the superior oblique. And also, it's going to carry information about the proprioceptors associated with that same muscle. As we'll learn when we talk about the eye and special senses, the superior oblique allows us to look downwards and laterally. So if someone's unable to look in those 2 directions, then that could indicate that there's some trouble with the trochlear nerve here. Okay. Next one, number 5, is a big one. He's a very important, he's in fact the largest of our cranial nerves. This guy emerges directly from the pons It's a large nerve that splits up into 3 branches right after it emerges from the pons, right about there. This guy is called the trigeminal. Tri is for these 3 branches. Kind of circle this guy like this, and we'll kind of label him out here like that. This trigeminal nerve has a diversity of functions, but its main function is it allows us to feel sensation and pain and temperature on our face, okay? So that's kind of the main function, allows us to sense the face. It also allows us to feel touch, not taste, but touch on the anterior kind of half of our tongue. So sense face and tip of tongue. These 3 branches have different and unique jobs. Okay, so the first branch is called the ophthalmic branch of the trigeminal nerve. This guy emerges through the superior orbital fissure right after he emerges from the pons, and this gives him access to the orbit. He then will project and allow us to feel touch on our forehead. He also extends on top of our nose and inside of our nasal cavity. So if you're having like a sinus infection and your nose is hurting, it's that ophthalmic branch of the trigeminal nerve which is allowing us to feel that pain. Okay, and this branch connects to our cornea. So if you scratch your eye, and you feel pain on your eye, if something pokes you in the eye, that's also that same branch. Okay. The next branch is called the maxillary branch of the trigeminal nerve. This guy passes out through the foramen rotundum after he emerges from the pons. This gives him access to kind of the cheek area. He also projects into your teeth. So if you get a toothache on your upper jaw, your maxilla, those signals are going to be transmitted through that maxillary branch of the trigeminal nerve. And also allows us to feel kind of pain on the roof of your mouth or your palate. Okay. So finally, this third branch, this guy emerges through the foramen ovale. He emerges, he's going to into this throat area. Right after he emerges through the foramen ovale, you're going to have a branch that stimulates the chewing muscles of our jaw. So this is actually a motor function that allows us to chew. So a branch of a division of the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve allows us to chew. It stimulates muscles like our masseter, our digastric muscle right here, also our pterygoids, and our temporalis. So this allows us to chew. Then that maxillary or that mandibular branch continues. He's going to dive into the mandible through the foramen or the mandibular foramen. That's going to give him access to all of our lower teeth on our lower jaw. So if we get a toothache there, we can sense that pain. He's then going to emerge through the mental foramen, which gives him access to the skin on the outside of our lower jaw. So if we get hit on the face or whatever, you can feel pain there. Right, so very diverse nerve, very important nerve. Next up, and then over here on this view, number 5, the trigeminal comes out right there. Okay. Number 6 is the abducens nerve. This guy emerges right here from the division between the medulla and the pons. So this guy right here, that's your abducens. Here. This guy controls the last eye muscle, which is the lateral rectus eye muscle. I'm just going to say lateral rectus of the eye. And this lateral rectus will pull the eye laterally. So a problem with that muscle also would, or a problem with that nerve could prevent a person from looking to the side in either eye. Just like all the other muscles, it's going to carry proprioceptive information. I don't know if I mentioned this, but all of the nerves that control eye muscles, so the abducens, trochlear, and the oculomotor, they all pass through the superior orbital fissure on their way out to the eye. Okay. From this view, number 6 is located right here, division between the pons and the medulla. So this is number 6. Great. Number 7 is your facial nerve. This guy is going to emerge out here, kind of more laterally. That is your facial. Kind of messed up the labeling here. In fact, I'm going to erase this orange line to give us some more room. So the facial comes here. Let me redo this. So here is the abducens. These two guys are the facial. A lot of books will draw them as two nerves because they carry both autonomic efferent neurons and somatic efferent neurons. The somatic efferent neurons are the ones we control. This allows us to control our face. So move our face. Okay, so all of our facial expressions are going to be controlled by the facial nerve. This nerve is its pathway is kind of funny. He emerges from the division between the pons and the medulla, but on the back. So here, right here is the facial. This guy is right there. He then is going to go through the stylomastoid foramen. That gives him access to kind of the outside of the skull, right about here, in the back of the jaw. And that allows him to curve around and innervate all of the muscles on the outside of our face. There's 5 different branches, and they're kind of located in this kind of orientation. That looks weird. But, okay, and all of these guys project out and allow us to move all of these muscles on the outside of our face. Okay. There's also some autonomic pathways associated with that second little division of the nerve. That allows us to produce tears, so it controls our lacrimal gland, right, which is a gland right here that produces tears. It also is going to stimulate the production of saliva, so the submandibular and the sublingual glands. So submandibular is right about here, sublingual is right about here, and that produces saliva. So I'll write it like that. Okay. All right, good. Now, there is a small role for sensation with the facial nerve. The facial nerve allows us to sense taste on the anterior half of our tongue. So we're going to say the taste tip of the tongue. Good. Perfect. Right next to the facial nerve is going to be the vestibulocochlear. He's going to be located right here. Okay, in this view, he's actually going to be located a little bit more posteriorly, so right about there, that is number 8. The vestibulocochlear nerve allows us to hear, and it allows us to get information about the position of our body in space, which is important for balance. Whether we're upside down, or laying down, or right side up, it also allows us to sense acceleration. So hearing and balance associated with acceleration and our position in space. So this is all sensory, so we'll say hearing, acceleration, and our physical position in space, which is all important for balance. Okay. Number 9 is our glossopharyngeal. This guy is the first nerve that it emerges only from the medulla. So he's going to emerge right here from the lateral side of the medulla. This is going to be number 9. From this view, you can see him emerging right here from the medulla. That is number 9. This guy is pretty unique. One of his important roles is a motor function. He allows us to swallow. Okay, but he also has some major sensory functions. And one of them being allows us to feel touch on the back of our tongue, but also taste the back of the tongue. So for taste and touch, I'm going to say the back of the tongue. The glossopharyngeal also records important information about how much CO2 is in our blood, also blood pressure through chemo and baroreceptors in our carotid sinus. So this is going to sense things like blood pressure, okay, and then CO2. So quite a wide diversity of different functions for that glossopharyngeal, the main motor being able to swallow. The vagus nerve is located also emerging from the medulla, right about there. This vagus nerve, he's going to be right here, is the only cranial nerve that emerges from the brain, or the head emerges from the skull area and travels to all of the major visceral organs of our body. So most of the visceral organs of our body. Most of the pathways these are all motor pathways, and these are motor pathways associated with our autonomic nervous system, specifically the parasympathetic nervous system. Rest and digest. So it's going to go out to the stomach, stimulate digestion. It's going to go out to the lungs, into the diaphragm. It's going to decrease breathing rate. It's going to decrease heart rate. It's going to travel out to other parts of the digestive system and just stimulate digestion. So we'll just summarize this as being, this is a parasympathetic control. So it really stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system by sending signals to most of our organs in our abdomen. There's also some important sensory functions. Just like the glossopharyngeal nerve, he's going to measure things like blood pressure and the amount of CO2 in our blood. In addition, it allows us to feel touch on our outer ear, which is kind of a random function, and also taste on our epiglottis, which is the little flap of skin that covers the larynx. The accessory nerve is actually a bundle of nerve rootlets that start out at the spinal cord, go into, and before I go on any further, this vagus nerve emerges through the jugular foramen, and that's the same pathway for the glossopharyngeal nerve, okay? This vestibular cochlear nerve, he emerges from the brainstem, goes into the temporal bone through the internal acoustic meatus, okay? So this accessory nerve, this guy starts out as a series of little rootlets from the spinal cord that leave the spinal cord, converge into a larger accessory nerve, which goes into the skull through the foramen magnum, does a U-turn, and exits through the skull through the jugular foramen. This guy allows us to move our neck, and he innervates major muscles in the neck, such as the trapezius. He's also going to carry some proprioceptive fibers associated with those muscles. Proprioception. Okay. Now, and he would be located right about here. You come out and go like that. That is number 11. Number 12, our last nerve, this is our hypoglossal nerve, which is right there, number 12. This hypoglossal nerve is going to be located right here, more on the anterior surface of the medulla. This hypoglossal nerve allows us to move our tongue. And that's a motor functions. This allows us to manipulate food and is also active during speech. So that's a pretty quick overview of these different nerves. Let me kind of change the color of these labels so that we can see them better, because I feel like this got a little confusing down here. What I really wanted to get across here was that we've got our optic here. We got number 3, which is our oculomotor. Number 4 is our trochlear. 5, trigeminal. We're gonna have 6, abducens. 7 is the facial. 8, vestibular cochlear. 9, glossopharyngeal. 10, vagus. 11, accessory. 12, hypoglossal. And that's it. Thanks.